Hey friends, it's the Otter. Today we're going to put a master cylinder on a 3rd gen 4Runner. 96 to 02, probably some other Tacomas there too. So, there is a difference between ABS and non-ABS. Looks like the non-ABS one has a farther spread on the tubes right here. So if this box looks a little bit janky, it is. This thing is from Amazon and costs $40. So I'll let you know if it works and let me explain the problem. I thought the clutch was burning up and it was actually the brakes locking up. So there could be a problem with the proportioning valve. Already went through and bled all the brakes. So there's no water in the brake lines. We're gonna start with this and hopefully it fixes it. If you're in that area of like having brake concerns, do the booster and the master together. Do not do it like me, one at a time, because this is a pain in the butt. So here's our Amazon brake master cylinder, and this thing was already stuck in there, which isn't a good sign. So there's a couple tools you're gonna need to make your life easier when you're doing this job. So this is a master cylinder bleeding kit. And I would say this is something that's okay to buy on Amazon. When you're dealing with brake components, it's probably not a good idea to use a premium brake master cylinder, but who knows. So before bench bleeding your new master cylinder, let's go pump some brake fluid out of the truck and take that master off and make sure there's no bolts that are frozen on the truck. So super important step. So I have Matco wrenches because I was unfortunately thought the logo was cool, but the most important thing is we have some teeth inside of here. Most of every wrench nowadays has some teeth inside of it, like Harbor Freight Icon wrenches, Snap-on, etc. It just basically doesn't round the brake lines out. When you got to put massive force on it like this one, that's probably not been off the truck since 1997. So it's probably going to make a mess. So let's go, baby. There it goes. I'm gonna hold this snout up to make sure it doesn't snap off. Ooh, that one's rounding. The back one is starting to round out pretty good. So the rear brake line, the harder one to get to, is pretty stuck. Ideally you have a flare wrench, but this is all I have. So I put a bunch of penetrating oil on it. Make sure we're square and tight on that brake line. And there it goes. So the penetrating oil, maybe it helped. So it was pretty simple, 2 bolts holding the master cylinder on, the brake lines are loose, and just make sure you got a rag underneath this because it's gonna probably leak. Okay. So we're gonna dry fit the Amazon one in there. See how that goes. So there's a very important measurement whenever you're putting a master cylinder on a car, and it's basically how much of the brake booster pushes into the master cylinder. So I do have the official things here, and it basically calls for SST, everything is special servicing tool. So we're gonna try to make one with a dial caliper. So what I'm gathering from this, which could be wrong, and I may be doing this twice. So we're gonna take our dial caliper, our specialty service tool. As you can see, there's a little gap right here. We're gonna bottom the tool out. And it's about 21 millimeters of depth into here. We're gonna adjust the booster push rod. I already did this adjustment when I put the brake booster on, but I unfortunately made the mistake of copying the Toyota one, and I didn't put another Toyota one on there. So struggling pretty bad with the depth without the SST tool. So what I'm gonna do is get some wet paint, and we're gonna paint the tip of this. Painting the tip of the push rod, and then see if it transfers into the master cylinder, because we do want contact, but we don't want it to push. Still, oh, we're starting, okay, it's starting to get a tiny little transfer of paint. So this is like the dead reckoning method of getting the push rod at the perfect depth. So I'm not 100% confident on the push rod depth from the booster to the master. I kind of dead reckoned it with a piece of paint, slowly walked it out until it transferred just a little bit of paint. So if you have that one too tight, it's super dangerous because it will lock the brakes up, and that may have been the problem with the entire car. But we're still gonna put the new master cylinder on because it was $40. So this is a self-bleeding kit. You can just kind of pump this thing by yourself without this kit, but it was like $9 and I thought to give it a shot. So it is a super cheap Amazon kit that comes with Teflon tape, I'm assuming, to seal this up. And hopefully you have a vise, because it will make things a little bit easier. So after bleeding the Amazon master cylinder and finding fluid coming out of the back, it was time to go to the parts store and get one. So I got a $79 AutoZone special here, and hopefully this one doesn't leak. So when you depress this down while bleeding it, you do need to check the bore in there and make sure it's not getting any brake fluid, or you're gonna have a really sad day. So essentially it was a really important thing to learn this little learning curve of measuring the depth of the master cylinder, because this one actually has a different depth than the Amazon one. And the OEM one's in the trash can, and we're not gonna reuse that one. So I have to go through that whole process, but I did have a nice little ghetto learning curve and basically can set that depth pretty quickly without struggling too hard. It's really hard to show you, but we do have a little bit of yellow transfer in there, so I'm gonna say the gap is 0. It's basically touching. The depth was very close. It probably would have been good enough, but a double check never hurts. So I'm gonna do the precise procedure outlined in the AutoZone master cylinder bleed procedure. So I didn't know there was a proper procedure. I just looked up in the Toyota repair manual and it didn't say to do this. So what it says is basically get a new brake fluid container, and I just dumped this out from the last master cylinder, and we're gonna fill this up 3/4 way. Okay, so now you have to wait for fluid to come out of these ports naturally. I just got in there and was like ramming that thing home like any dude would. A whole jug of Harbor Freight brake fluid. So now we gotta wait a couple minutes for fluid to naturally make its way down. So we got a pretty good flow coming out of this port, but we're waiting for the other one to flow. A steady flow as outlined by the instructions. It's kind of cool, the AutoZone one comes with the correct master cylinder bleedy things. So the Amazon ones I don't have to use those ones even though I bought them. So the next step outlined in the instructions is to push this rod in 1 inch and then slowly release, wait 15 seconds for the bubbles to settle. Okay, we got a 1/4 inch ratchet and extension. It's kind of a blunt tool. We're gonna push this in 1 inch. The hoses aren't in brake fluid, it just sucks fucking air up. With the proper bleeding procedure instructions provided in the AutoZone master cylinder, it took a total of 6 minutes to properly fully bleed the master cylinder. Just make sure you check the bore inside of there and it's not wet when you're pumping. So you're only supposed to push it in 1 inch according to the instructions. So that is sealed up and ready to put on the car. And I'm pretty sure I have the right clearance on the push rod on the brake booster, but we'll find out if the brakes are locked up later. I'm gonna say it's 100% worth it to buy the bleeding kit because we have nice little block off valves and everything is threaded in. So I'm not gonna spill brake fluid all over the truck, or very minimal amount of brake fluid when I'm putting the lines on. Okay, so bolting this on isn't particularly challenging, so I'm not gonna zoom in too much for you. So the wheel does spin, but I can't start it because there's a spark plug thread sealing in the cylinder head right now, but that is a good sign. We do have some spinning there. So I prefer alcohol just because it has less fumes than brake cleaner, but it's pretty important that we clean off anything, ooh, not the fuse box, any alcohol or any brake fluid that dripped on this, because brake fluid is the worst substance ever, and this looks like water. But that's fine because water does the same thing for brake fluid, it neutralizes it. So that about concludes the master cylinder install on the Toyota 4Runner, the 3rd gen 4Runner, of course. Non-ABS. It's probably the last 4Runner with non-ABS. So you gotta click this video here because we gotta go bleed all 5 points of fluid in the Toyota 4Runner per the repair manual.